Martin, I think it's sometimes wrongly assumed that doing a show car is easy because you've got no technical constraints. But are you suggesting, based on what you've just said, then that in some respects, productionizing of a vehicle is easier because of the longer time frames?
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's. No, I wouldn't see it like that. The longer time frames allow the further development, and in most cases, it will be better. The development of an end product. But what I mean is that for your own progress and your own experience, to have had to work under such high pressure situations is invaluable later when you're dealing with, let's say, a longer term project, or you're more aware of what's involved through the process of creating or producing a motor car, yeah, or a motorcycle. And I think that that's where I was very fortunate to have that experience. Very young, relatively young, early 20s, mid 20s. That was quite special, I think, then.
I think that's also maybe a side to being a designer, and being not just a designer but a good designer, is that part of the job. It's not just creating the fancy sketch, right? It's all of those things that you're talking about. The responsibility is immense. There's so many moving parts. There's so many people to deal with. There are time pressures. There are budget pressures. There are your colleagues and managing modelers and all that sort of thing, that I think is it's probably not talked about enough and not focused on enough in the education system.
Yeah, if you're talking about design education, presumably from a point of view of let's say creative art and design. There are also changes, I think, today in how the design is taught today, and I think there's more emphasis going on teaching in a way that benefits the students, that they'll come to, I say a working environment or a professional environment. I think that has changed from my day, where it was all still a little bit, I don't say free and easy, but it was less commercial. I think there is a movement today where things have become, also within the design schools and colleges, they're more commercially orientated. And that probably is a good thing from the point of view of producing work and projects and things that are on a commercial basis. It might be slightly contradictory from a pure art sense. Do you understand what I mean? That might not be so creative or individual. And I think that it's interesting because what's important about the design world is to establish your own individuality and your USP, your unique selling point. And I think that each and every student should be encouraged to produce what is for them special, because ultimately that's what makes their design work unique and sought after or memorable. If it all becomes a little bit too commercialized on every level, then there's less individuality.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's very accurate, and I didn't probably asked that question very well, but it wasn't so much about the design education in general, but it was more about you specifically learn to be very resourceful because, as you said, you needed to make up your own entertainment. So you were, fixing go-karts and engines and tuning things and making things and breaking things and exploring with clay in an environment that didn't necessarily have the set structure. So I kind of I feel that maybe that sense of going out there and doing things intuitively or using your own initiative is maybe not talked about enough. I thought that you were such a great example of that specifically, where there was no roadmap and you just kind of, you weren't trying to please anybody. You naturally started putting all these pieces together to carve your own path.
I mean, it's life, isn't it? Really, we all have to find our way, and I don't want to sound like I'm an old guy. Essentially, I suppose I am, but the thing is that so when you're asking me some of these things, and I'm looking back from the point of view of if I look back with the old head, I've done this, and then there's the other aspect where you think, well, no, I'm in a business which is predominantly younger generations, and I feel that also, but you can still. You can still get this or have this youthfulness that is necessary to be creative and to be able to relate also to all different aspects of the design business. Yeah.
One of the things that that is unique about your path is your sense of independence that you've gained through being a contractor or a consultant. And I know that when you started out, it wasn't a common thing, but I think as far as designers go, it's not such a common thing still today. I mean, it's generally, it's a blanket statement, but generally it's the modelers that tend to be freelancing, going from here, going from there. And designers generally get, they stay longer periods in one particular time and get a secure job, and there's kind of a career progression. There is obviously a lot of there's a lot of negative things to not having the kind of stable, predictable income and job security. I wonder if you could elaborate on what the things are that you gained out of being a freelancer or a contractor your whole career.
I think the main thing has been just to have unconventional, let's say, relatively speaking, an unconventional approach to life. So by that, I mean, I've had the opportunity to travel that had I been, for example, staying way back in Ford, I might have remained around that area like many of those other guys did, Instead, I was able to get across to Europe. I spent a long time in Munich, as I think you're aware of, to the extent where, having arrived in Munich in the early 90s with no German language knowledge whatsoever, I was there long enough to be able to learn and speak German very very well. That would never have happened had I not been moving as consultant to different places. The different people and experiences that I've had is a massive benefit through this traveling, and to some extent directly due to the consultant nature of my work. Yes, there is and what I'd also like to say is that was important for me from the point of view of keeping an edge, for want of a better way to put it, for staying a little bit on your toes, to stay creative, to keep looking and searching and finding. I just see it like to stay creative. That you need to be moving around to do that, to have these opportunities and to experience the different aspects of life and to see it. That adds to your abilities as a designer. You're more aware of what's going on all the time, and the curiosity that you need. Yeah. The downside.
You also talked about the big. Oh,
more or less touched on. I was going to say the downside of it is, as you've touched on, is there is a lack of security. Yes, there is, and there can be periods where you question, or I certainly have as well. Well, maybe it would be more sensible to have stayed in one place, and I wouldn't be sitting here now thinking, what have I done, and what am I going to do next? So there is that. There is a lack of security, financial lack of security. It's not easy. It's not easy. And as one gets older, then of course it becomes more difficult. And I'm not going to deny that or can even hide from it. It's a fact of life. And so it's a fine line to travel to get that balance. If on that side, it is. Yeah.
Would you change what you've done?
To be honest, I don't think I would, because that would fundamentally not be me. And I think that's another aspect that everybody should think about. It's all very well to look out and say, oh yeah, he's got a great life, he's doing this, that and the other. And maybe not see how good or how special your own situation is. And I don't want to come across as being so philosophical. It's not really meant in that way. But perhaps it's a thing with age. You start to accept or see things about, right, well, that's the person that I am. Why would I change that? I think this is something that probably only comes with as one matures. Yeah.
Martin, you have a son that's an accomplished designer in his own right, and I wondered what your advice was to him when he was starting out. Did you suggest to him that he should? Did you give him the same advice when he was starting out? To kind of find what's important to him.
You're talking about Daniel?
Yes.
No, I think so. In fact, I never pushed any of my sons in any way from the point of view of what they're going to do. I think they all are finding out and have to find out in any case what it is that they can do. In the case of with the design side with Dan, I was quite surprised when he actually then went into design. Not unhappy, but surprised, because initially he was talking about something else. So you know, I could also say that perhaps then he's enjoyed an unfair advantage in some respects.
On that subject of the unfair advantage, is it correct that he purposefully didn't use your name in order for him not to get preferential treatment?
There may be an element of that, but you would have to ask him directly.
Okay, all right, that's enough. Okay, Martin,
But I wouldn't have any problem with that either.
I think it's a very admirable thing if that was the case. But we don't. That's okay. We can move on from that. Martin, I wanted to ask how your your process of working has evolved over the years as the technology's changed so much. You are still obviously very hands-on in the design process, and I'm interested to know how you've evolved as a designer.
Well, it's difficult to get away from that. And that. And apart from that, how does one evolve as a designer? I suppose my experience, I would hope, now allows me to be a little bit more quick with my decisions about what is working and what's not working, or what's you know, I don't want to sound like what's good design or what's not good design. It's not necessarily that, but what has got the what's got that little bit of something that you want to develop or pursue. I think you come to these points of view a bit more quickly with experience and knowledge. You know, perhaps at the beginning, as a young student, you'll put up so much work on the wall, and then put up more and more and more, and to some extent, all it does at the end is it just shows that you've done a lot of sketch work. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a lot of good ideas there. Do you understand what I mean? I think
100%
with
yes.
The experience, what you start to do is you become much more selective, and to some extent, it can even, you know, it's a balance, because sometimes with some of the studio presentations, you know, when you've put, or I've done something and there's a little bit raised eyebrows because, oh, but then I know myself what I've come to the reason or the selection of what I've got there much more quickly. It's more discriminate, I think. One becomes a bit more discriminate. It's more down to quality as opposed to quantity. I think that would be a simple way to sum it up. And I think that perhaps that's something else that as students as well, it's important to try and learn that earlier, and to be more almost ruthless with yourself than try and pretend that you've done an awful lot of work. Yeah, you might well have done an awful lot of work, and that's not, I'm not reducing it, but what I'm saying is that there are some things that I think that, right, that meets the brief, that meets the criteria, and that other stuff that covers all the rest of the four walls of the room doesn't, you know, so don't put it up.
I think that's great advice, because we are sometimes, I was taught, you know, like when I was at university to, you know, more. And I think that there's an element of truth in that in terms of your development in your sketching. You have to draw a lot. You have to do a ton of it to get to a level where you can see an improvement in your skill set. But that doesn't mean that everybody necessarily needs to see that. There's a temptation sometimes to want to show, as you put it, that I've done all this work. Look how hard I've worked. But that doesn't necessarily show a vision. And that if you start going through all those little things, if you go through all those 50 thumbnails, are there 5 in there that are good? If not, then, it's all rubbish. If there's 5, put the 5 up. Don't mask your I don't know, your lack of vision or your insecurities or whatever with like tons and tons and tons of work. So that's great advice.
Yeah. I mean, you could say if you've not done the work, then own it. Stand there and say, excuse me, I haven't done it, rather than put up lots of rubbish.
You've downplayed a lot your motor racing career or endeavors, whatever you want to call it, in your younger years. I know that you got up to Formula 3 and you were in fact competing at times against people like, you were in the same races at least as Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna. I wanted to know you ever look back and I can't, number one, I can't quite believe it. That's absolutely mental. But I wonder if you ever look back at that and go like, I wish that I had maybe pursued that path instead of the design path.
Let's put it like this. I've come to terms with the fact that I didn't pursue the racing side. Okay. It's still something inside that drives me. And I suppose it always will, because that is a fundamental part of my being. And I'm happy to have had those experiences. So, yes, I could say, well, it's just how life goes, Sam. It's a very difficult thing to separate, I just see it like this. I had those experiences. Perhaps had things gone differently on the racing side, we might be sitting here now talking about, me as an ex-Formula 1 driver or world champion or something. We're not. That's just how it is. That's what initially drove me. And yes, I've competed against some really top drivers and on occasions outdriven and beaten them. And from the point of view of, if I take that type of experiences to my car design side and what's involved with, for example, ergonomics or the interior of a car, or how one drives or should be driving. I've got quite strong ideas and opinions on that. And I have to say that many of the things parts about car interiors and the information that is that the drivers are expected to deal with today are completely unnecessary, and actually in many cases make the driving experience more dangerous today than it was 30, 40 years ago, just because of what the manufacturers are putting in front of the drivers. And that's also down to the designers. So, there's a lot of stuff in cars today that is just there for the sake of it, being able to say, we've got that stuff in our car. Yeah, great, but how does it benefit you? might kill you. Yeah, and that comes, I could say,
So
that comes
question
directly
everything.
from a little bit of my racing side. You know, when you're racing, you've got a very, you need very clear, simple information that you can assimilate instantly. And it's not really that much different to driving on the road. In fact, you could argue that some aspects of driving on the road requires even more attention because of, you know, side streets with kids and or dogs bouncing, running out, you know, all sorts of elements that if you're scrolling through your iDrive screen that's telling you about this, that, and the other, how can you be concentrated and paying attention of what you're doing? So these are some aspects that I could, you know, will see on that have a direct relation to my design work or thinking. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Martin, you still do a bit of, yeah, absolutely. But you still do it as a hobby. Is that right? Racing?
I haven't really, well, there's two things. I haven't done racing as such seriously for quite a long time. Sometimes the boys get me onto a kart and we do some karting, you know, and that's quite funny, usually. Or the other aspect is, of course, on the motorcycle aspect. Yes, I mean, there's another thing, right? As I'm feeling more talkative now. Motorcycle, superbikes. There's not anything that can touch them in terms of performance. There is nothing that exists that can touch the performance of a superbike. And I suppose that when I got into the bike design side of it, it's a similar thing. You start to learn what is important to control the motorcycle, what type of ergonomics you need, what type of aero protection, what type of body armor and body protection, and all these. There's so many aspects that are so important that unless you're doing that, you don't have a knowledge of it. And so what I want to say is that this is another side of the hands-on thing, or the you know, I've been fortunate enough to be able to have the ability to ride motorcycles and also, you know, pretty high level, and that. And those things are aspects that fulfill every side of my being, so that I'm using every sense, physically and mentally, to control and to ride or drive these vehicles, and if I then use or have this knowledge that I can put towards what I'm designing, or aspects that I can question or even discuss with, for example, if it's the engineer, yeah, or the ergonomics on the interior, or the aerodynamics at the wind tunnel. You know, I would say, I have quite a good grounding in most aspects, and without that, I don't think I'd have been able to create. I say such good work, but over the years it has been good work, and they are good products that have come out of it. And I think going back to those aspects of, as you've mentioned earlier, with the racing side of it, and or the motorcycling side of it, these are things that I've been able to tap into as resources for me. Yeah, with the idea that it benefits the product that I'm working on or designing.
Martin, I want to. You've already offered quite a bit of useful advice for younger people. So I'm not going to ask you for another piece of that. But I just very quickly, your son is an accomplished designer. You've got a brother who has got his own design consultancy. I'm asking, have you guys ever thought of creating the LONGMORE powerhouse and setting up a business?
I suppose we haven't actually all sat around and talked about that, no. And I don't know if it would work, Maybe it could be made to work. And, I've got 7 sons, actually. 2 are in the design world of automotive. Another one is graphic designer, musician. I've got one of the lads 3 lads out in Munich still. So, we're quite a mixed group and quite an eclectic tastes. But they all ride motorcycles, more or less, or have driven go-karts. And I'd encouraged that from an early age. Let's say not pushed them to do it, but the opportunities they've had to do it. And I think that has been quite a bonding from a family point of view. With regards to running a business together, I don't know. That's a little bit more tricky, I think.
It could undo all that. It could undo all of that work, right? It could undo that.
You've
bond.
still got many of those things to come, I think. But it's not quite so simple. It's a bit of a juggling act.
On the subject of getting your kids riding motorcycles, I've got 2 young kids, and I think my wife is not letting them go anywhere near motorcycles. Did you have the same problems convincing your partner to let the kids get on the motorbikes?
Actually not, but here's an interesting thing for you. My dad, who was a general practitioner, doctor, local doctor, he didn't want any of us on motorcycles. So as I grew up, any motorcycle I rode was completely without him knowing about it. And it was always a case of, I've seen too many young guys dying, I've patched up too many broken people. Son, under my house, under my roof, you'll never have a motorcycle. And I didn't have. But on the racing side, we were kart racing all over Britain, trundling around in a Land Rover with a trailer with 2 karts in the back, and attending events all over Britain. And he was very supportive of that, because he figured that the racing was safer on go-karts with 4 wheels. And then it became, Formula Ford and Formula 3. As I then was, left the house on family and started riding motorcycles, and I bought my Fireblade. I think that was 92, 93. And my sons then, first family, were early teens, and let's say they were already outside of that that I would be concerned from the point of view of hurting themselves. I think I encouraged the boys to do as much activities, and also you could say not dangerous, but they learn from doing these type of things, and I think that's an important aspect. And also how to look after themselves. Do you understand? And they're not wrapped up in wool. They're not mollycoddled. I think, but I'm from an age when it was like that. On the other hand, I could say that, for example, when we lived in Sweden, when I was working at Volvo, I became aware of the Swedish, and I'm talking back now in the mid-80s, when we were in Gothenburg, and the Swedes had quite a high regard for safety and looking after their children. So the children actually played with helmets on in the playgrounds. Do you understand? Or were ice skating.
Yeah.
And that for me was quite in a sense culturally quite interesting, because when we then came to, I'm jumping around a little bit, but then when we were living in Munich and my boys were able to go ice skating and play type of ice hockey in the English garden, the best thing to do was to have a little helmet on them. So because it was from the point of view of time saving, you weren't always at the hospital, Do you understand?
Yeah, no, I get it. That's yeah, for sure. Martin, I thoroughly enjoyed that. I think we'll wrap it up there. We've covered a lot. We've gone through a lot. You've given a lot of really insightful pieces of information with regards to your experiences, and you've done an immense amount of work. Really, really inspirational stuff, and it's what a journey it's been. It's been pretty fascinating. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time, and apologies for the dodgy internet.
Yeah, the pleasure's mine, Sam, and it's very nice to have the chance to speak to you, and also, you reminded me with that note from all those years ago, and I'm just happy that I responded in a courteous manner to you back then. But yes, no, it's but it's another aspect of life, I suppose, that and in the design world that I've learned as well, that came also from the concept car stages and attending the press events and having interviews with the magazines. Because what I've learned then was that invariably, no matter what you talked about with the journalist or the interview, they somehow managed to turn it around to what they wanted everybody to get to hear. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't know why that is, why they do that.
Well, I don't either, and that's what I found very refreshing with your podcasts, having listened to a few of them now. And I like your approach, and I think it's fundamentally very good, and it gives people the chance to speak without having the feeling that perhaps it's going to be either misconstrued or turned around and put in a different way to what you'd intended in the course of the conversation. Yeah. And I think if and that was an aspect that came out of my earlier days from journalism and some of the interviews that journalists were conducting back then. Invariably, then you open the magazine to read. I said that. No, it's like, no, it's not what was meant at all. Why have they written? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
totally, and 100%. Yes.
anyway, I hope that this has been for you as entertaining as for me. And yes, the delay isn't the best on this, and it does make things awkward. Also, what's interesting is how you come across on this screen as you look like a Caravaggio painting.
So
You've heard
sorry,
of Caravaggio?
my bad. As I said, yes, I do, of course. Yeah, I again, it
Yeah.
looks a lot more.
Quite.
This is my shitty webcam. So, but I've got another camera that's taking a better picture. Unfortunately, you can't see it right now. So, yeah, it is what it is.
But you do. It looks like a Caravaggio masterpiece.